Welcome to Wednesday's Drink by the Vertical Believers Church, where we hope to quench your spiritual thirst until you enter your house of worship this Sunday. We're still covering the 10 commandments. We have gotten through 7 of the commandments, and number 1 is know God before him. He is to have no rivals and exclusive worship, no making of graven images. Don't make anything that you will call a god. It says, do not take the Lord's name in vain. We talked about how that is done. A Sabbath day of rest, which would be a day of worship set aside strictly for you and your God, to honor your father and mother. And we talked about what honoring your parents looks like. And thou shalt not kill, which we also saw the Hebrew word there was murder. And there's a difference between killing and murder, as was discussed. This week, we're looking at thou shalt not commit adultery, number 7, commandment number 7. Thou shalt not commit adultery. And the reason you should not commit adultery is the damage it does to the relationship. When God created Adam, he had all the animals pass before Adam, and Adam didn't see any that was a helpmate for him. So God took a rib and made Adam a beautiful bride. And Adam, when he saw her, said, "Woo, woo, wow." Well, that's my translation. But the King James says, Adam said, "This is flesh of my flesh, bone of my bone." And so Adam was pretty excited about what God made for him. And God told them, "For this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother and cleave unto his wife, and they shall become one flesh." And so you have to remember that cleaving that's being spoken of, that cleaving that's being talked about in Genesis 2:24 means a glue-like bond. That cleaving means that husband and wife is not going to let anything come in between them. Now notice, we're told to honor our fathers and mothers in commandment 5, but notice here that God says we are to leave our father and our mothers, and we are to cleave unto our wives, which means all other relationships, the most important relationships in our lives, are usually those with our parents. And so God said that we are to leave that relationship, and we are to put our spouse in a position of love. That basically in your hierarchy, it should be God, then your spouse, then your children, then your job. Or at least that's the way that I see it. And so if God's number 1, then you'll be able to love your wife. Now notice that after Eve was created, God performed a wedding. And so there was never, ever in the time of history fornication. God married Adam and Eve, and they had sexual relations within the confines of marriage. And so God shows you how important that is. But now adultery plays in the role that it separates the one flesh principle. The word there in the Hebrew is echad, which means those two people become one flesh, which means they are actually now a compound unity. And so when someone commits adultery, they put a barrier between them and their spouse, and that unity there is now broken. What God had brought together to protect us emotionally, to protect us spiritually, because remember, when Adam and Eve were in the garden, they had total harmony before the serpent was able to come in and to get them to separate themselves from their God. And what's the first thing they did when that spiritual adultery was committed? When Satan was allowed to drive a wedge there, it caused Adam and Eve to hide from their God. What physical adultery does for the husband and wife, it causes one of them to run and hide from the other. Well, one of the things that God wants us to know is that love bond that we have one with another and in the marriage bed is not to be shared with any other person on earth. That is a relationship that is exclusive. Just like God is the only God that we can serve, our spouse is the only spouse that we can have sexual relations with. There is no other person on earth where we are permitted to go outside of that marriage commitment and fulfill our needs elsewhere. You know, there's been times that that my wife has talked to me about emotionally giving away the emotional stuff that belongs to her. And sometimes when we go out and we talk to other people and we talk to other women and they're getting their emotional needs met through us, when that's a situation where we should be with our wives, fulfilling their emotional needs, but we're giving that away to someone else. Can't do that. And it took me a minute, to understand what my wife was saying in that instance, but now being a pastor and counseling people, I understand exactly what she was talking about, even though she didn't realize at the time how theologically correct she was. Or maybe she did know and just, let me believe that she was just talking off the cuff. But anyway, good move there, honey. But as we looked at this thing of adultery, it separates families. It causes children to be separated from mom or dad, and sometimes from mom and dad. And what normally ends up happening is when you commit adultery, what you ran over there for, whatever you were chasing, you find out it was really dust in the wind, because eventually the same problems that ran you away from wife number one is the same problems that are going to run you away from whomever you committed the act with. And so we've got to be real careful there. Also, in Proverbs 5:18, God says that we are to rejoice with the wife of our youth. How can we rejoice if we're not giving them the best that we got? Sorry about that, Anita Baker, but we're not giving them the best that we've got. We have to constantly give them what's due to them. And yes, it is a struggle. At times it is tough. But it's still our responsibility to get that done. In Ecclesiastes 9:9, we're told to live joyfully with the wife whom thou lovest all the days of thy life. We are to love her every second that we are on this earth with him. And so he says to do it joyfully. Yeah, there's moments of contention, there's moments of all kinds of stuff, but that joy never leaves, because joy is not something you earn. Joy is, okay, move on. Ephesians 5:25 tells us, husbands, we are to love our wives the way Christ loves the church. And so Christ is constantly sacrificing. He sacrificed himself for the church, and so the husband is to do that for the wife, and the wife for the husband as well. A lot of times when you talk to women, they act as if it's the husband's responsibility to do all the work, but it's actually a joint relationship. There's needs that both individuals have to bring to the table. Therefore, we're told in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 that the wife and the husband have to meet each other's needs, and therefore you keep an adulterous situation from happening, because it's your responsibility to make sure that physically your husband or your wife is taken care of, so they won't have a need to wonder or look around and have wondering eyes, as most folks do. And also with the adulterers, Peter says, likewise, husbands, this is 1 Peter 3:7, dwell with them according to knowledge, giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered. When we don't love our wives, it hinders our prayers. Like it or not, guys, if we don't love them, it hinders our prayers. Adultery brings problems into it where everything's going to be hindered. And we're going to and find ourselves drifting further away from our spouse, then we start drifting further and further away from God, because we can't break his commandments and still live peaceably. At least I know that I can. And so when you find a situation that separates the two of you, and you don't do what you can to alleviate that thing, then you need to check your salvation. This has been the Vertical Believers Church Wednesday Drink. If you know someone who needs a sip, pass this along. And remember, vertical living is found in Colossians chapter 3, verses 1 and 2, where we're told to set our affections on things above, not on things of the earth. Go live vertically.